Good morning. I'm Celia Schlomer, and I'm from the University of Cincinnati, UCED in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm here working with, as part of the team for the Family Resource Network of Ohio, who brings all the Charting the Life course work to the state of Ohio. And we are here today to talk about the power of utilizing Charting the Life course and the tools in the IEP process. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about me just quickly so that if you ever need to contact me or want more information, you can reach me through the Family Resource Network of Ohio.org. Whenever you go in and put a contact for more information in there, those will be distributed throughout the state. So if you're trying to reach me, you can do that. You also can find me with this contact information. I'm at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital and support families from 0 to into aging, and I can support any family member in that role. So I'm very excited to be here. I do have a background in being an educational advocate and sitting at the IEP table with families for over 15 years prior to my role within the UCED and within Family Resource Network of Ohio. And I'm hoping to integrate the knowledge that I have as a Charting the Life course ambassador and coach, and the knowledge I have as an educational advocate together in this space to talk about how we can use these tools to empower not only the family voice, but the student's voice in the IEP process. Oh, sorry. So currently, I want to share with you that Charting the Life course and its framework has many different facets, and this slide really gives us the easiest way of explaining it. The Charting the Life course is a framework to start with, and it guides thinking about people and vision and how we kind of plan out our life. And it can really guide that thinking and support that thinking and support conversations around that thinking. But it also can be utilized to take action or to change policy or procedures that we use in developmental disability systems based on that thinking. So it really holds up things like that person-centered voice. And it really talks a lot about making sure that individuals with lived experience are at the core of decision-making and that their voice is heard in the room, and that this framework and tool can really bring that up. And then lastly, the tools themselves that can be ways to share information and plans and visions with others as you begin to learn about these and become more familiar with them. You then can utilize them in that way to share your own voice as a family. You can share your voice as a professional, or you can even share your voice as an individual. And most importantly, sharing that individual's voice in the many rooms where it's important for them to know what they want, what they don't want, what their vision is, and what their concerns are. So that's really the kind of the crux of the background of this work. For those of us that are family members, the most important thing that I want you to know about Charting the Life course is that it really is about having a different type of conversation in all those rooms that you talk about your child and what they're up to and what their dreams are and where their challenges lie and what you want as a family and what your family is important to your family. And so it really helps take those conversations and make them conversations of possibility, just really talking about what's possible, identifying new opportunities and supports. And I can say to you as a parent, there are times where I couldn't see possibility, and those are tough times. And knowing that there's a tool that's going to flip my framework if I just start putting my thoughts into it was really life-changing. And to be able to share that with my now adult daughter, I can't tell you the changes that has meant for us as a family. Conversations with and as a family, it changed how we talk to each other. It changed how, as my daughter went into adulthood, how she shared information and how I heard it. Changing the conversation as a team. So those IEP teams, maybe you're connected to the county board and it's your county board team, but just knowing that these conversations are richer and more robust as teams or as families. Conversations, reflecting, looking back at what we've done in the past and really thinking about what might be our next step. And then those conversations about possibility, not always disability. Conversations about disability have to take place, but when we can have a counter conversation about possibility, it really can change things for families. We're going to discuss in these next 2 sessions. This is a 2-session, 1.5 hour, twice sessions. So we are going to talk about 4 different tools by the time we complete the 2 sessions. We're going to go deep with the 1-page person-centered description. We're going to talk about both the exploring and the planning trajectory in the IEP process. We're going to look at that integrated STAR. Once you start developing a plan, who can support you, your child, and your family on this new vision that you create? And then lastly, those domain tools. And so we're going to look at all 4 of those tools across these next 2 sessions. So let's set the stage a little bit around disability in general across our nation and in Ohio. So the reason Charting a Life course came to bear was because we really knew that we needed to think differently about services and supports. We were at a point that the conversation needed to change, and there were a group of people that came together to do that. But really, when you look at this slide, we really want you to understand that and talk about that 100% of individuals with disability. So out of the 100% of individuals with disability in the United States right now, about 25% of them are directly connected to services. In Ohio, that means they're connected to services or service dollars through their county board or through their school or both into adulthood, right? And there's 75% of individuals who are not connected to services directly, right? We may be aware of them. In Ohio, our numbers are a little different because we have a group of people that are not connected, but they are part of our knowledge base, and we communicate and connect with them. But knowing that 75% of folks are living out there without services is enlightening at best. So when we think about that, I always challenge when I'm in the room with you to say, why do you think that is? But we know that is for lots of different reasons. Often I hear it's because folks don't know they exist. We don't know what we don't know. And many of that 75% hasn't even learned that there's systems that can support them, right? They're still in that process of learning. So we as professionals need to get deep with those folks and make sure they know. There's also because they don't know how to utilize it, or the system's a little cumbersome to manage and keep track of. And we are certainly aware of that and hear that from families. We also know that many families choose not to participate because it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit what their family vision is. They don't see what is being offered as something that they need or that they want right now, and various other reasons. But us as systems, being aware of that and talking more about that and hearing more from families about that is really important. Now, when we look at the school systems and their percentages and their people, I don't have the whole of people with disabilities, but I was able to share with you that when we look at individuals within a school, as late as 2019, 2020, when you look at students from 3 to 21, which are those years that they would qualify for an IEP, that 14% of all public school students have special education supports, right? We also know that when we look at special education support, we often hear about those 3 tiers of intervention, that once folks kind of know we exist and that we may be struggling in school, there's 3 different tiers and 3 different ways to receive those services. Tier 1 is we're going to be receiving that support and that extra help that we might need in the regular education classroom as part of the regular education curriculum. And that's 80% of the students. We get students at different places, and we're kind of doing that differentiated instruction for everybody, trying to make sure that they, whatever gaps they have, whatever deficits, that we're kind of answering them in that regular ed classroom and what we do every day in regular education. In addition to that, there's that tier 2, and that's that 15 to 20% that is identified that needs supplemental group work. So if I'm potentially being pulled out for speech or receiving speech in the classroom, doesn't matter, but that we're into those smaller group instructions specifically. I think a lot of, beyond the IEP is that 3rd grade reading guarantee. That's another space that you're going to see kids identified that jump up to that tier 2 as we're trying to make sure they're reading by 3rd grade. And then there's that intensive tier 3 services. And again, that's only 5 to 7%. But that's important to think about when you think about our population of kids with special education needs and how that works out within schools. And services and how they've been offered across time have changed, both educationally and within developmental disability itself. This is a picture here of my sister, who was the oldest in our family. And my sister was born in 1950. And my sister, when my family understood that she had a significant disability, they were given a choice, not only by their developmental disability system, but by the medical system, to say, this is going to be too much for you. And my sister was placed into what was then called an institution. And she, as institutions changed, her life changed, and she ended up in a nursing home type setting eventually, but never went to school. That wasn't an offer. It wasn't even considered, right? Then I share with you, my sister-in-law, Kim, and Kim was born in 1963. And Kim's family was told the same thing, that it might be better for her to go and be placed in an institution. But at that point, the family voice was really rising, and they were saying, what you're doing there, not okay with us, not what we want. And my in-laws said the same thing. And they said, this is not what we want. We're going to take her home. And so she did not go into that path because the family voice, it didn't fit my vision, right? So they said no. And she began to, she was raised at home. They did what they could in school, but IDEA at the point that it is now was not yet developed. And so it looked a lot different for her in school too. This is my niece, Grace, and my niece, Grace, was born in 1998. So when she was born, not only did they not even begin to have a discussion about whether Grace would go into an institution, but what they said was, you have a beautiful daughter with Down syndrome, take her home and love her. And here are these great organizations, the Down Syndrome Association of Cincinnati and the Hamilton County Board of Developmental Disabilities. And these folks are going to help you do this, but you got this. And we're right there with you, kind of space. And that's where she went. And there were medical professionals that were recommended who had a great deal of experience with kids with Down syndrome, things like that. So they were kind of wrapped around with these services that supported Grace in her life and as they moved forward. So that looked very different. And again, because families said, we need grassroots organizations that are right there with us. They're built with family members and with family members in mind, beyond just what's offered through systems. And so that's really where we saw a real change for that family. And then lastly, I used the Charting the Life course symbol as that next step, where in 2012, a big group of stakeholders came together and said, hey, we need to look at this different. What does it really mean for families to feel supported? And let's dissect that. And so that conversation took place in 2012, and we began to think about things differently. This slide represents kind of how we altered the thinking and why they want to push this transformational thinking. If you look to your left there, everybody exists as a person inside a family, inside a community. Those families look very different. Folks are terribly different, with or without disability, we're all different. And how that mechanism of family and individual looks different in every family. And then that exists within every community. And that community can be where you live. That community could be your church community or your school community, right? So that's kind of how we all exist, right? When you look to that centerpiece, that shows that services circle in the middle. So what we said is these folks who are born with disability need additional help. They need support. They need services in order to live, right? And so recognizing that, systems began to build those. And that's kind of what I walked you through with that timeline. And they looked different across time as we learned. But when we wanted to become person-centered, when we knew that we were building this services for that person, and if you just use my sister for an example, we didn't take into consideration what that might change for family. So when my sister left our home when she was 9 months old, that altered our family culture moving forward. It altered how my mother interacted with her children. It altered everything, right? So we know that decision to say, here's services, and it's important to take advantage of those services, how they're built matters to families, right? And how a family is perceived within the community matters, right? And so we began to see that. And even now we see that. The conversation that I have about school is that you can look at that one-to-one support, which is an ideal support and always can be meaningful for families. And families have worked, had very difficult conversations maybe to get that type of support. But what we recognize is having a one-to-one, maybe at the lunchroom table, at 6 or 7 or 8, that makes you kind of super cool. The adults sitting at the table, all the kids want to sit around and hang out and chat with the adult. But when all of a sudden the adult's sitting at my table when I'm 14 or 15, that changes my connection to that community. Because at 14 or 15, kids don't really necessarily want the adult at the table, right? So recognizing that how we build these services, we have to keep in mind families and how they work and operate, and individuals, how they work and operate, their needs, their wants, and not just build them with that lens of what's easiest, best, or sometimes least expensive or financially smart. So moving to the one on the far right. And this is what we're hoping for with Charting the Life course. And that is that idea that those supports and services represented by those stars are integrated in a way that I don't have to give up that context and connection to family, or that context and connection to community. And that's ultimately what this conversation was about and where these tools came from. So where are we now? The core belief of Charting the Life course is that all people, not all people with disability, all people and their families have a right to live, love, work, play, learn, and pursue their life aspirations in the community. And one of the first places that live, love, work, play begins in some formal setting is in school, right? And so we begin to make some of our first friends there. We learn how to socially engage. We learn how to share, all those things. So really school is key to this, all people and their families, key to this core belief, right? And so when we think about school, where is that core belief in school? Well, when you look at IDEA itself, it is mimicked in this documentation. So the role of that all people can live, love, work, play, and pursue their life aspirations in their community is right there in IDEA. So when you look, they're called to talk about the improving of educational results for children with disabilities. It's an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equity of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disability. So right there from the beginning, we're saying school is key to this and key to life outcomes. And we have to keep this in mind at the forefront of our work, right? It also says that we are charged to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And this doesn't say at 14, we're charged with preparing them for further education, employment, and independent living. This is from the day that our name goes on an IEP, that this is the charge of the work, and no matter what age, right? It also says that educating children, that it's more effective by having high expectations and access to general education curriculum to the maximum extent possible. And that's why that whole idea of least restrictive environment came into place, because education is on a continuum, but the ideal situation is high expectations and access to the general ed curriculum. And so we hold that dear and we move away with information, data, and conversation every time we take that step away, right? And then lastly, this idea that we make sure that kids benefit from this education that we're creating around special education, and that special education can become a service for kids with disability rather than a place where they're sent. So when you look at that continuum, when Grace began school, it was no longer a place. But when Kim was in school, my sister-in-law in 1965, when she finally got to school, it was a place. So we have to talk about that piece, that it's not a place, it's a set of services, and they follow the child in the space that makes the most sense. And that's where we have those discussions. But we cannot lose sight of a school-age child or any person, that we can't look at them totally separately. When you think about those models I looked at, that we always have to consider a person within the context of their family. And remember, I told you those folks came together in that space and began to talk about what it truly means to be supported by families. And that happened in a place that it resulted in something called the Wingspread Report. It happened at the Wingspread convention or gathering space. And out of that came something called the Wingspread Report. And in that report, the one key piece of information that really sticks with me is that idea that family members play key roles in identifying and securing their opportunities for their kids with disability and their family members with disabilities. And that role of them fully participating in their communities and within their family in meaningful ways is led by family itself. And so therefore, we have to keep family at the center of the conversation in addition to the individual. And so when we're in this space and we're talking about an individual education plan, that stretching of saying, but what is the family role? What does the family want? And keeping that lens on it is kind of what we're charged with, because yes, it's an individual plan. It is not a family plan, but we know that family is truly important to outcomes for individuals with disabilities. So we can't ignore that. And we need to bring that back to the forefront of the conversation. And we know that for families to feel truly supported, we need to be supporting them in different ways. So yes, we're in a room talking about IEPs, individual education plans, right? And that is a good or a service for many kids with developmental disabilities that they need special education. And if you look at that green bucket on the right, that's a good or a service. So would be any physical supports that I need. Maybe I'm a person that utilizes a wheelchair for mobility, or I might utilize a walker. I might just need access to my work chunked, through an IEP, but whatever good or service I might need, that's one bucket, right? There's also discovery and navigation, just knowing what's possible and being able to connect with information through, one of the first things that happens in our first IEP meeting is we get that big, thick book that tells us about IDEA. We've handed families information, not always digestible information, but information. So we know families need information, right? The Down Syndrome Association for my niece, another place where we can get great information. So that's another bucket. Then the third bucket is that connecting and networking bucket, that bucket where I can understand from other families, their journey and what they've learned from their process. And these can be formal or informal. And I can share with you that as within school for me, when formal didn't exist, I utilized and built informal connections because I knew how important it was. I want to look at these three buckets a little bit deeply here to just kind of say, we're in schools across special education and beyond, how do schools fill these buckets, right? So when we look at discovery and navigation, we know that school, in the community and in school, we're going to get more information on disability. They're going to start telling you about IDEA and what it is. They're going to share knowledge about best practices around education for an individual who has similar challenges or gaps to the child that is in your family. They're going to talk about how to navigate the system, which meeting's going to come first, then what's going to come, things like that, or the ability to advocate for those services and changes within systems within your district or whatever. So those are important. Overall, these three strategy buckets are filled in different ways so that we have connecting and networking groups within the state. So we do parent to parent, we have self-advocacy organizations, we have family organizations, we have SIB shops, things like that. Overall, in this state of Ohio, we might have other day-to-day services, self and family directed services that come from our county boards. We have transportation. You might be utilizing or looking into respite, things like that, adaptive equipment, as I spoke of before, financial assistance. In school, you might, for discovery and navigation, you might have school grade orientation meetings. You might have school and district websites that share information. You might be on an email list. There might be parent-teacher newsletters or online bulletin boards that are shared with you. Educational learning nights, lots of different things that schools do. There's robocalls that came all the time. I remember those. And then there's your IEP or your response to intervention meetings, those RTI meetings. In your connecting and networking, there's parent-teacher association meetings, your PTA or whatever they call that. Grade level events and gatherings, there's school-wide events, there's district events, different ways to use social media, extracurricular, and then your IEP meetings, right? But then in your day-to-day, your service connections and information, schools provide resources and services that help you understand gaps in any kind of level, whether it's special education or whether it's personal resources, free lunch, community clinics, etc. That tier 1 and tier 2 intervention that may come without the support of an IEP or a 504. The school nurse and the social worker who's checking in on family needs, community counseling that's often available in schools, and just the special education and related services space, right? But we always know that everyone exists within the context of a family, and we have to take that into consideration to build what will help them with what they want or need in a way that it's able to be accessed by them. In this space, we say that family is defined by the individual. It does not have to be blood related. It's their village. And in this space for a village, I encourage you that if you're having IEP meetings for support, you can take someone else in. It doesn't have to be a formal person. It can be your sister. It can be your spouse. It can be another family member to just support you in that room, in those conversations. Individuals and their families need supports in different ways. And we're constantly kind of juggling that balance of who gets most attention, right? So always look to beyond your child with a disability to see who else might need support. And it's not dependent on where the person lives. So we don't have to live in the family home to be part of what they consider family. This work is always, whether it's IEP work or whether it's charting the life course work, it is always family centered. At the center of this work, we know that all families exist within all individuals exist within the context of their family. We know right now that 89% of individuals with disability are living in their own homes or are living in a family home and are supported by family. Family is important to each and every one of us, not just because individuals have disability. Family is just important. Family members play key roles in identifying and securing opportunities for their family members, as we said before in that wing spread report. We also know that when we come into a room as a family member, we bring a lot of things with us. Social sciences tell us that biology comes into the room with us, what generations and generations. So it may be your child has a disability that is riddled through your family. My family is riddled with ADHD and dyslexia. So just, those things that come through biology. Social, who your people are, how big your village is. Do you even have a village? And that impacts how a family operates. Environment, where you live, your socioeconomic status, things like that come into play. Policy. So what is the family policy? What are the family dreams and aspirations that are just assumed? We're all going to be teachers. We're all going to, go to college. We're all going to graduate from high school and go straight into work, and we're all pipe fitters or whatever it is. But those things come into play in these conversations. Family trajectory, family life experiences impacts individuals and has to always be considered. And this work is done across the lifespan. I want to encourage you who are here watching this with younger children, you're not too early. Never too early to start thinking about this. Those of you that are on the ends of transition out of high school, you are not too late. It is never too late to start these conversations. The beauty of life course is it looks at each life stage and talks about what you can be thinking about and how you can look back and reflect. So it's never too late, and it's always looking at the lifespan in front of us. So charting the life course focuses on the person, not on the paper. That's a game changer in the IEP room. Really can be. It's strengths-based. IEP process is built to be strengths-based, but we also know that often we start focusing on other things because to qualify, we start talking about challenges or gaps. And so we really want to bring back that strength-based model when we have conversations about what's possible. It ensures that the student is at the center of the work. It supports family and school partnership. It really is about building that vision together and understanding a shared vision as you move forward and utilizing that vision to guide our decisions. It reflects on both what's important to the individual and important for. It reflects on what's important to the family and what's important for the family. It recognizes abilities and what needed support to support those abilities. It reflects on what's possible and not just what's available. This is a game changer in a lot of IEP conversations. How we build it, we'll talk about with some other tools, but just not talking about what's available, but really talking about what's possible and what is wanted and desired. and needed. So it's not about identifying a service or a program. That is built into the process to identify what services are needed, but Charting the Life course takes the IEP conversation beyond that, right? We need to qualify under a certain coding for a certain disability. That's necessary. That has to be identified, but we also want to go beyond that, right? It engages the team into ongoing listening and learning and further action from the individual, the student with a disability, and from the family. It moves the student closer to what they want out of life. And if they don't know, it helps them to start imagining. And the first person-centered tool that I want to introduce to you in this work is something called the one-page person-centered description. And that is a very simple document that asks 3 simple questions. What do people like and admire about me? What's important to me, or what's important for me? I often say for my niece Grace, it's very important to her to have Diet Coke and pizza whenever possible. But it's also very important for her to not have Diet Coke and pizza whenever possible. It can be used as a way to motivate her to consider something, especially when she was younger in school. However, we have to start looking beyond just what motivates her to do what we as a system, we as a family are trying to make happen, and go and think about what's important for her too, and balancing those 2 things. How to best support me. And this is a game changer, especially when you're talking to the students themselves, right? What is that? Well, how to best support me? It can be accommodations like you find on an IEP, but it also can be things that don't get placed on the IEP that are keys to unlocking my willingness to learn in a new setting, that are keys to unlocking my self-determination in a way that I'm going to grow to be that student that you always hoped I would be. So really looking at this and listening to this and talking about how it can be integrated through this process is super important. So if we were going to use a person-centered description, the information that we learned within this process, I'm going to back up for a second. When we do this, I strongly encourage that you do it not just from your perspective. So when you go to lifecoursetools.com, you're going to see on the website that they have both what they call family-centered tools, and they also have person-centered tools. So the person-centered tool is going to say, what do people like and admire about me? The family-centered tools are going to say, what do you believe people like and admire about your family member? Because remember, your view is not your student's view. And we really, at any age, want to pull their voice into the room, because that's where that self-advocacy is going to come. That's where that self-determination is going to come. I used to say with my own daughter that when she did things that I was like either horrified or frustrated with, often I had to stop and go, but that is a skill I want her to have as an adult. I just don't want her to have it with me right now. But knowing that we can look at both person-centered and family-centered gives you as family members a voice and a way to express your concerns, your wants, and your desires. But we are not pretending that they are the same exactly as your students. And if they are, great, but we want both of them there, right? And we also, with our individuals who we have concerns about whether we're really able to tap into that. Maybe they're nonverbal, maybe there's other reasons why we're concerned that we're not getting their voice in the room. There are lots of ways to do that too. You can have multiple people in their life from different facets, someone from church, someone who's on a ball team with them that's a peer, a teacher, another adult that they really admire, things like that, to say, could you fill one of these out for me? Could you share with me what you think people like and admire about them, what you think is important to them and important for them? And with those peers, you're going to see something different than what you see with somebody from church or another adult or a teacher. And then when you see common themes, you can go, okay, I think we're onto something, right? and you can build it that way. And you can do that for a child who's very verbal too. I recommend it either way. But when folks ask me in those other situations, I want to make sure that you know that this is a usable tool for everyone. If your child doesn't want you sitting there and writing it down in front of them and that makes them uncomfortable, just have a conversation. What do you think is important to you? What's your best day look like, right? And those are also ways to do this. Using this within the educational and the IEP process. So think about this, just within the general education process, student introductions, when you want that child to meet their new teacher for the first time, we often ask for a pre-meet with the teacher one-on-one prior to the start of school when there's going to be a new setting or a new teacher. This is a great tool to use then. Student-led conferences, when a student is going to be at a parent conference and give their input, or maybe they're not invited and you want them there. That's a great tool to utilize so they can express their needs, wants, and desires. And then they present the one that says what I think people like and admire about me. And it is their voice, right? We want that to be there. Annual transitions to new classrooms and new buildings. That big move into middle school or junior high, great tool. Guidance counselors, mental health counselors, course planning and transition planning. So when I'm in high school and I'm trying to decide what courses I want to take and whether, what setting we're going to utilize for that, same thing. Great information to have reflect on that. And then discipline meetings or hearings. I think for any child, having a one-page person-centered description before they walk into some sort of disciplinary conversation within their school, maybe even a suspension or an expulsion, beautiful tool to be talking about how to best support me, what's important to me, and what's important for me, right? Within the IEP process, evaluation planning meetings, future planning statements, student profiles, student participation in the IEP meeting. We always are looking for those ways at a very young age that they can participate, but we also know it gets very overwhelming in those rooms, and that room is we're in that room for a long time. So therefore, what if they came in at the very beginning and said, hey, I want to share with you a little bit about me, right? So utilizing in that process, taking what's important to me and putting it in the student profile, building a future planning statement from all three of those statements, very powerful. Going into the evaluation planning, knowing what's important to them and how to best support them may help us reflect on where we need more information, especially if the response from the school is like, I had no idea that was important to them. I had no idea that that was a good support. We might change what we look at and what we evaluate or what we assess because of that. Manifestation determination meetings. If you're not familiar with these are meetings that take place if a child with a disability has been suspended for more than 10 days to home suspension, not in-school suspension, where they cannot access their special education curriculum. And if that happens, there's a hearing to determine whether or not that behavior that got them suspended is in fact a characteristic or representation of their disability or representation of improper support of their disability. So again, how to best support me, and that conversation in that meeting, inviting a child to participate in a room where their voice is hugely important and should not be listened to. Great, powerful tool. Functional behavior assessments, again, using their voice in that assessment so we can determine the best way to support them moving out of that also. So when we talk about charting the life course, it's very important to us also to talk about looking at the whole child. And we do this through something called domains. We look at different domains. But in the special education, I just want you to know there's a parallel. That special education and IDEA says we have to look at that whole child and at these domains. We're trying to improve educational results for children with disabilities through ensuring equity of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. And you'll see these in the domains. We'll talk about community living, right? We'll talk about daily life. Daily life is independent living. Full participation is community living. Economic self-sufficiency is financial security. So safety and security. So we're looking at all those pieces as we look at these domains. So again, it is in IDEA. It aligns perfectly and is a great space to enrich these conversations. Even in Ohio's commitment to education, they go so far to say that we are going to work together with parents and caregivers and community partners to help schools meet the needs of the whole child. The domains that Ohio discuss align with, they're not identical, but they align with the Charting the Life course domains. So again, we know that looking at the whole child is important. The Charting the Life course domains, as I started to allude to before, are things like achieving outcomes, or I'm sorry, are things like daily life and employment. What am I going to do all day? And having a vision for what I want to do all day in my life begins when you're very small. We have conversations about what do you want to be when you grow up? Kindergarten curriculum starts us by letting us know there are different careers. There's firemen and there's policemen and there's nurses and there's doctors. And we start talking about all those spaces as young as kindergarten, right? So we want to talk about that. Community living, and it talks about where I want to live, right? What do I want in my community? Who do I want in my community? And keeping a lens for who that is that's important to them in that process is really important. Social and spirituality. Who am I going to do this with? And we talk a lot about what happens in school when we leave school at 12th grade or beyond, and we're in the community. And that place that we went every day that we thought we had community maybe isn't there anymore. But that shouldn't happen. If we have an eye for that social and spiritual connection that's important to the whole development of the child, we need to know and have an eye for that continuing with a depth of relationship and reciprocity that allows that relationship to survive outside that building, outside those 12 grade levels, right? Healthy living and employment, that idea that I need to stay healthy. How am I going to do that? How do I access the care that I need? And in schools right now, accessing mental health care is hugely important. We know that this is a time where we're seeing a ticking up of mental health in the student body overall and having much different conversations about those pieces. So recognizing that's something we have to have an eye on, not only at home, but at school, because my success in school is dependent on it. Safety and security. As we talked about, financial security, but also knowing how to be safe and building that ability, not just at home, not just at school, but in the community too. And then lastly, advocacy and engagement. This is my passion. This is that space that not only are we looking for ways to engage and be known in the community, but we're really looking for those valued roles in the community and really looking at how we're going to make that happen. In addition to having those valued roles impact policy and procedure. So knowing that as a child with a disability within your building, that I'm seen in a way that I'm valued, that when we create procedures, emergency procedures, tornado drills, that we're building those and creating those in a way that you've thought about me and you've thought about how, not just in my IEP, but in general in school curriculum, is this plan that we've got working for everyone? And can we change the greater plan to work better for our kids with disabilities so that we're not only addressing it within the IEP, right? We know these are all related. We can't think about my daily life and what I need and what I want in my daily life without considering safety, without considering my health, without considering who the people in my life are that I'm connected to, and do I have those connections, and how am I going to make what I want to do all day happen? Considering community and considering how I'm valued. So they're all interrelated, and we rely on that interrelation, and we have to think about that deeply when we have conversations about school. We can talk about IEP goals. We can talk about where it's going to happen, but we have to consider my mental health in those two decisions. Is this a goal that aligns with what I want so that I am going to willingly participate and not shut down and feel discouraged? Is this a goal that that we can support without supporting my mental health to know I can face these challenges? Or is this a goal that we need to think about where it's happening, because I get upset when I'm excluded from a particular setting, right? So having those conversations. And it's all a balance. And we are guilty as families, as systems, as education, both developmental disability systems, medical systems, and educations, of really kind of parsing this out in a way where we're really making a lot of our decisions based on safety and security and healthy living. And we're excluding some of those bigger dreams like social and community and value, because we're trying to keep our family members safe and we're trying to keep them healthy. And I'm not saying that they should be done exclusively. I'm just saying that we really have to think about that balance and encourage a lens on these other ones alongside of it in a way that we can have both, right? So we want to really balance that and not because sometimes we think so much about safety and security that we lose opportunity for, period. We lose that idea that we can participate because it's not safe, instead of how is it that we can make it safe, or how do I build those skills so I can do it safely. I see this happen a lot within transition planning, right? We get to that age of 14 or 15 and we're talking about going out in the community, and school takes a role in that. And all of a sudden what I've done and my behavior within school is fine within that setting and we can manage it there, but we've never had the lens to think about how are we going to manage it out in the community. And our instinct is to say, well, we'll do it in the classroom instead of having them go in the community. Where if we started earlier with the lens of eventually we want to be able to do this in the community, we can have it go better or differently. So often, as we get into that transition age, we start to look at employment. That becomes a huge conversation, right? That daily life and employment. And so now we're kind of disregarding the social, the self-advocacy piece. It's in the IEP, so it's there a little bit more, but that making sure I have value within the communities in which I exist and participate, hugely important. And then that community living. And we start to kind of really focus on employment, but we know we can't have one without the other. When was the last time you stayed at a job when you didn't feel that people appreciated what you were doing, or you didn't have connections with people? So employment is hugely impacted by my personal view of how I engage and how I'm valued in a community and who I'm connected to. So employment often is off the table based on where I live or whether I can get to work. So we've got to start talking about those things. So what I've kind of said in a nutshell is, as you grow, it's important to know and share with others through maybe this IEP process within my profile, in my future planning statement, things like that, how you want to spend your time, what's important to you at home or in the community, how you are going to stay safe and who can help you stay safe, who you care about and who cares about you. It's important to share with others and know what you find fun and interesting. This is a huge piece. Often our kids with disability through the that coming into transition don't even know what they like and don't like, because what they like is pleasing the adults in their life, and what they don't like is anyone feeling disappointed in what they did, right? So fun and interesting things that you enjoy doing, and connecting with people that and know people that to connect with that like doing that too. Understanding the rules that affect you so that you can stand up for yourself and have those conversations. How to get involved in your community and engage and create a valued role within your community, in the school community, in the regular community, so that you have a sense of purpose. And what we're trying to do then really is build experiences across the lifespan, considering your current experience and that which you had in the past, increasing and encouraging those positive life experiences in a way that you can avoid and mitigate negative and traumatic experiences, recognizing those traumatic experiences and using those for information as you plan new experiences. It's all related. And so we do this within those domains in a way that can be really powerful. One of the tools that we utilize to just kind of think about and look at those domains is called the domain vision tool, right? And the life domain vision tool helps you to start saying, so if I'm looking at daily life, if I'm looking at community life, if I'm looking at my social and my spiritual life, what is it that I see in the future? If I'm looking at my child who's now a fourth grader, what do I imagine their daily life will look at like maybe in eighth grade or seventh grade, junior high? What do I imagine their social life might look like? What do I imagine their health to be, and their responsibility and interaction and role within maintaining their health, right? And so when we start to think about those things, we start to kind of push ourselves to imagine. We push ourselves to see that vision of possibility, which is greatly impactful as we begin into transition, because we've thought about it, we've talked about it, we've imagined it, right? And by putting those things down on paper, you're able to then begin to think about steps. So I want to share with you the story of Gabrielle and Gabriella, a mom and a son who came to me wanting to improve their IEP process. It really wasn't specific to do planning or mapping. It really was just she wasn't content with what was going on in the room. So at that point in that story, she says that she began to utilize, she came to me, we began to talk about the tools, and we decided that we would start with an exploring trajectory. And when she did the exploring trajectory, we placed a timeline on it of about 12th grade. So at that point, when she designed this idea of what she wanted or didn't want in 12th grade, we were able, I'm sorry. She began with this tool. I'm so sorry. In this tool, she began just to think about goals for her son upon graduation of what it might look like in each of the domains. And when she did this, she was able to reflect back and see the need for parsing this work out. So if you look at this particular one, she began to say in daily life and employment, her vision, and she did this together with him, but it was his words, but she put it together for him. But she said they came together and they decided that he wants to find what he wants to do. He wants to, their vision is still for him to go to college, and they really wanted to understand what it is that he might want to do for a career. So between now at 6th grade until then, we need to know what we want to do for our career. He wants to learn to follow his routines and do chores and have a healthy life. So that independent living that we talk about. But we also see that he wants to gain self-control from his emotions and his anxiety. Schoolwork made him anxious, connecting with his peers made him anxious. And so we really wanted to see that part develop in a way that he was able to control it a little bit more to have a happier life. And then he wanted to have the ability to really look at the consequences of his decisions. Mom wanted him to have an understanding when something didn't go well, that he had control of that. He could change or do something differently. And so that was another piece of it. They also talked about how would he continue to live at home at college? That was kind of what they were thinking, that he wanted to stay at home, but he wanted to be able to be making his own decisions and kind of managing his own routine, even though he might be at home, right? So kind of creating that distance between parent decisions and child decisions. And he wanted more say as he got into 12th grade or so. He wanted to be able to understand in that social and spiritual realm what to do or who to call when he was having a difficult time with a peer. He did have some interactions with peers that mom was concerned were bullying, and he wanted more positive relationships with his peer, and he needed to know with his peers, and he needed to know kind of how to manage that when it did happen and begin more positive relationships with his peers. And he was going to need help at school to do that. He wants to have a pet and a connection with an animal. And he also wants to continue to practice his faith. In healthy living, he said he wanted to understand the advantages and challenges of being a young man with autism in puberty and better understand that in a way that he could understand how it affects his relationships and affects others. And so that, that puberty is a challenging time for our individuals with disability to understand what's happening with their bodies and be able to interact with their peers directly. But what you can see with this is by setting this up, then she could go back and piece it out and say, okay, where are we right now? What are we talking about in the IEP that's going to impact any of this, and how? And she began a larger conversation with her school. Well, what happened in this was 3 really rich conversations before they ever began writing the IEP. What also happened was a very intrigued student services person wanted to know more about the tools, wanted to see how it impacted the conversation with the team. And it was such a positive experience that actually this young man began his transition section of his IEP at 6th grade, or the end of 6th grade going into 7th grade, because they had the information, because she'd done the work and she thought about it. So we know that transition conversations have to start at 14, but also know they can start before that. And these tools, use of these tools, mom's brain kind of starting to think about this, changed how she entered the room around the next IEP. And the outcome was very dramatic for this family. And she's since used other tools to do that planning. So what I want to end with today is a quote. And that comes from Family Voices. And what they said was, while typically developing children have everyday experiences that get them ready for their future, children with disabilities have fewer chances to practice these skills. Families need to be intentional about our planning for our children's future, including the dreaming broadly about possibility. So that's really why we wanted to introduce this in the process. We want it to help families think about what they really imagine for their future in a way that they can start utilizing the spaces and places within the IEP in order to have those conversations, in order to bring that information to bear. And so just like I talked about the parts of the IEP where you can interject information from the one-page person-centered description, this domain tool that we utilized or talked about is also a place where you can take this information and have it go into your future planning statement. Take this conversation and have it go into your student profile. Take this conversation and have them impact what we're doing around anything from transition to least restrictive environment to whether and what we're going to do as far as testing accommodations. It really can be integrated into any of those pieces. In the second session, we'll go a little deeper with some of the tools that will help with that too. But I really hope that this begins to help shake the cobwebs off of the limited possibilities, begins to encourage you as a family member to be part of your IEP meetings in a different way. I do want to encourage you that if you want to begin this conversation within your IEP meetings, don't do it by walking into the meeting with it that day of. Just like families don't like to be surprised by things day of in an IEP meeting, I encourage you to take the time to meet ahead of time and say, I'm beginning to use these tools. This is what we've done so far. And my favorite phrase is, so how can you help? And that really makes a big difference, because then they can look at it and go, what pieces of this can we grab a hold of and move into our documents? If they look at it and say, I don't think we can grab a hold of any of this, I don't think it's appropriate for us, you can go back, and as you go through these 2 sessions, we'll recognize places where it can be added. And maybe the first step will be the baby step of just changing your future planning statement. And we'll talk about that in the next session, because that is a place. The other place, my favorite spot, is that other important information that's on the front of the Ohio IEP. And grabbing some of this and putting it in there is a great place to have those things, because it's right there on the front page. So even with a substitute teacher, it can be grabbed a hold of and understood. Okay, I want to remind you very quickly of the folks that have made this training possible. The Family Resource Network of Ohio is a resource for you, for families, to get more information. You can get more information about trainings like this, anything from 30-minute videos into 2- and 3-hour live trainings. So please go check that out. That's at frnohio.org. And that's where you can also request a training. So if you're someone who's a family member and or a professional, and you have a space that you think this information would be helpful for other families or other professionals, please reach out through that website and request more information about a training. In addition to that, I want you to know that in Ohio, there is a commitment moving forward to charting the life course, and you can, that commitment is supported from our Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities and from our Ohio Developmental Disabilities Council. And so this work would not be possible without them. And lastly, I want to share with you the lifecourse.com website. There are great videos and information there that you can utilize to get started. There's fillable tools that you can download and type into or print off if you're old-fashioned like me and just like to use a pen. But I want to encourage you to think about the possibilities of where you can utilize this information moving forward. I want to thank you for your time, and I want to wish you well. Please reach back to any of us if you need help getting started. And thank you. Is it over?